Hi everyone, this is Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do the mid-year freakout tag. If you've been following my channel for a while, you might notice that I really never do tags, and I mean never do tags. But I watched everyone on booktube do the mid-year book freakout tag, and I really love watching it because I actually find the questions to be really interesting, and I just like getting kind of a preview into everyone's best books of the year because the end of the year is still pretty far away. I realize that it is now basically the end of July by the time you're watching this, but I decided to film this anyway, so hopefully you don't mind that it's kind of late. And I just think it's a good excuse to, again, kind of share with you what I've been reading, enjoying, my disappointments, and all of that. And hopefully you stick around and don't mind this video. It's a little more low-key than some of my other ones. I've been up since 5 a.m. thanks to my little kiddo, and I just needed something easy to get through. So let's get started. Let's gush about my favorites, let's complain about the disappointments, and let's go. First question is, what are your favorite books of the year so far? And I'm saying books plural because for most of these questions, I'm going to try to give you an answer for both my horror reading as well as my science fiction and fantasy. So for horror, if you've been watching my last few videos, hopefully this isn't too repetitive, but probably shocking no one. My favorite so far is The Changeling by Victor LaValle. This one blew me away. It's this beautiful story about parenthood, and it's fantastical, all framed around fairy tales. And I just have never read a horror book quite like it. There was a scene in here that really scared the pants off of me, and I just found it to be disturbing and dark, and I love the inclusion of technology and social media, and all of the things I enjoy are in this book. I listened to this via audio, and the narrator, who is also the author, did an incredible job, and I love this book, and I'm going to be gushing about it at the end of the year again, so hopefully you don't mind. But yeah, this book is definitely ending up on my favorites by the end of the year. There's no way that it's getting bumped off that list. And for science fiction and fantasy, I'm going to go with the Broken Earth trilogy, which starts with the 5th season. I also have the Obelisk Gate here. I also read The Stone Sky, but I currently just don't own a copy of it. And I absolutely love these books. They are post-apocalyptic. They're fantasy, but with elements of science fiction. And the characters are morally complex and gray. And it's just emotional and devastating, but in the best possible way. And if you want to just be punched in the gut, this is a series to check out. I love the world building. It was so intricately plotted and it just worked so well for me. Definitely recommend it. Everyone on BookTube hypes this trilogy, and there's a reason for that. Next is favorite sequel, and for horror, I'm gonna go with Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland, which is the sequel to the YA book Dread Nation, which is an alternative history where there was a zombie breakout at the end of the Civil War. Honestly, I liked the first book, but I just wasn't compelled to pick up the second, but I ended up doing it because I was planning a buddy read, and I'm so glad I did. While I liked the first book, the second was just even stronger. I love the dual perspective, and I think especially reading it this year during the Black Lives Matters movement, which of course is still ongoing, and I want to show my support, but I think that this book was just incredibly topical when I read it and just really spoke to me. It was very complex with some really interesting character work, but at the same time the plot just moved along and I had to know what was going to happen to all the characters, so definitely recommend that one. And for science fiction, I'm going to talk about a series I have not reviewed yet on my channel, but that is The Machineries of Empire, and the book I want to mention is the second one, Raven's Stratagem. The first book being Nine Fox Gambit, which is this really complex, hard military science fiction series. And I liked the first book, but I'm not sure I totally understood it, but the second book was so much easier to understand, and it was so funny. I did not expect the series to be so funny. No one talks about the humor in this book, but oh my goodness, I was laughing out loud and I just fell in love with the characters, and yeah, just loved it so much. So this second book and then the third really punched it up another level, and I'm just so excited to do a proper review for you all. Next is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to. For horror, I'm going to go with Mallory by Josh Malerman, the sequel to Bird Box. And while I am not a super fan of Bird Box, I still want to read and weigh in on the sequel. I'm not sure how it's going to go. It's been a bit controversial online, the fact that there is a sequel to it, but I want to read it and tell you what I think. So I definitely plan to check that one out. And for science fiction, I really want to read The Light Brigade by Cameron Hurley, which is supposed to be a military sci-fi with elements of time travel, and it just sounds right up my alley. So I'm hoping to get my hands on that one fairly soon and report back as well. Next question is most anticipated release for the rest of the year. And for horror, this is kind of weird because I've actually read my most anticipated book already, and that is Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar. I actually got to read this months ago because the arcs came out really early, but I'm really looking forward to sharing my review with all of you. Needless to say, I really enjoyed that one, so I'm just excited to be able to discuss it with more people online. And for science fiction, I think I'm gonna go with The Chimera Code by Wayne Santos, which is a cyberpunk book with elements of fantasy because it follows a group of hackers that include not only an artificial intelligence, but also a mage. And it just sounds like a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to that one in November. Now we're on to most disappointing reads, and this kills me, but for horror, I think I'm gonna go with Junji Ito's No Longer Human. This is actually his retelling of a very popular classic Japanese novel. And so it's not his own story, so that makes me feel a little bit better, but I really, really didn't like it. I ended up just skim reading the ending. I just could not get through it. It's very long and I just didn't enjoy it. There's a lot of weird stuff in it. I haven't actually reviewed it yet, so I'll explain that more in another video. But it kills me to have anything by Junji Ito in my most disappointing section. And for science fiction, I sadly have to go with Goldilocks by Laura Lamb, which is not a terrible book, but definitely a disappointment. It's about a group of female astronauts that are going off to the Goldilocks zone to colonize a new planet. However, I was disappointed because instead of this being this awesome feminist piece of literature, it turned out to be a book about a bunch of women that were taken off the space program and decided to go and steal the rocket and go to space anyway. And that setup just ruined the book for me. It just changed how I felt about the women and what they were doing, and it was such a bummer. I have reviewed this earlier in the year, so you can go check out that video if you want to hear more. And for biggest surprise, I'm going to just give an answer for horror, and that is The Night of the Living Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. And this is a surprise just because I am so hit or miss with him as an author. I love his writing, but I often don't connect with his stories because I find that sometimes the plot and the narrative kind of take a back seat to the character work, and I'm just someone who needs both in my stories. I actually DNF'd his novel earlier this year, Only the Good Indians, so I'm delighted the fact that I really loved this novella that's coming out in September. I will have a review out, I have filmed it, so stay tuned for that. The next question is new favorite author, and this can be a new to me or a debut author. And for both my picks, they are just simply authors that I read for the first time this year. For horror, I'm gonna go with Bernard Taylor, and he's actually been writing since the 70s, I think, but I read his book, The Reaping, for the first time this year, and I'm now very interested in reading more of his work. I've only read the one book, so I don't usually count an author as a favorite until I've read more, but as soon as I finished The Reaping, I basically added all of his other books to my Goodreads TBR, and I'm definitely hopeful that I will find more favorites amongst them, as well as it also makes me more excited to read more vintage horror in general, because I do admit that I do lean towards new releases, as you can see in this video. The other author I want to talk about is for science fiction fantasy, and that is Yoon-Ha Lee. I went and got a chance to read his fantasy book that is coming out at the end of the year, Phoenix Extravagant, which is a rebellion story about a mechanical dragon, and it's oh so fun. I loved it. And then I got the opportunity to read his science fiction series, binge the whole trilogy, absolutely loved it. Again, I'll be talking about both these books before the end of the year. And I just think he is such a creative writer. He brings a diverse perspective as a trans person, also a Korean person. And he just brings a lot of humor into his stories. They are so funny, and no one talks about how funny he is as an author. So just love him. I look forward to reading more by him and just reading anything else he puts out. And the next question is favorite fictional character. For horror, I'm gonna go with Apollo from The Changeling, and I'm picking him just because I think he is such a wonderful father figure, and you just can't help but rooting for him as you're reading this book. So absolutely love Apollo. And for science fiction fantasy, I have to go with General Jadao, who is this morally gray, possibly morally black character at times that has done some terrible things, has gone crazy, and I just love him so much. He speaks his mind and is just everything I want in a character. And for the next question, which is fictional crush, I don't really have an answer because I'm old and married and boring, but if I had to pick one, I would say General Jadao because I just weirdly have a thing for him. I could read about him all day long. I could read fan fiction about him. And yeah, love him so much. For anyone who has read this trilogy, you know how wonderful he is. The next question is a book that made you cry, and apparently I'm very black-hearted because I have not cried while reading a single book this year. I'm just a pretty emotionless reader, and yeah, I'm a robot, so I had no answer here. But the next question I do, and that is a book that made you happy. And for that, I'm gonna go with The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry. This is a book I haven't reviewed yet because it comes out in September, but I just finished it and really enjoyed it. It's a horror coming-of-age story that is all centered around females. So it's a female coming-of-age story. And it made me so happy because it's a story that I've wanted to read for years and years. I've just wanted this narrative to exist. And this is the first time that I've read a book that has been described as a female coming-of-age story that actually fit the bill and delivered what I was looking for. So looking forward to sharing my thoughts with you in more detail, but I did really enjoy that one and it made me very happy. And for most beautiful book that I received this year, I have to go with Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia because this book is frankly gorgeous. The camera does not do justice to how nice this book is. I have just filmed a review for this, which should be up on my channel by the time you're watching this video. So if you haven't checked it out, please do so because I kept it all spoiler free and I just want to share my gushing thoughts with you all. The last question is books I want to get to before the end of the year, and it was so hard to narrow this list down, but I came up with 4 answers. The first one is Into the Miso Soup, which is supposed to be a really dark and disturbing Japanese thriller, so naturally I wanted to check it out for myself. The next book is The Good House by Tiana Reeve Dew. This book I'm definitely going to get to because it's my Patreon pick for my book club for August, and it's supposedly a haunted house story, which isn't really my go-to genre, but I'm hoping it'll work because I've been doing really well with diverse stories. I just find them to be really refreshing, and so I'm hoping that this different perspective will really bring the book up a notch and hopefully help me find a new haunted house favorite. Then in terms of fantasy, I also want to get to The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in his epic fantasy series. And I want to read this because everyone else online is reading through this book in preparation for the new release. I don't think I'm going to get to this one until probably Christmas or at least towards the later winter months. So I'm definitely going to be trailing behind everyone else, but I do want to get to it. I have the first book and I just really think that these books could be new favorites of mine because I've loved everything else I've read by Brandon Sanderson, and I just need to stop being intimidated and actually pick this book up. Finally, for science fiction, I also want to pick up Dune by Frank Herbert because everyone on BookTube is reading it this year because the new movie is coming out, and I definitely want to check it out. I've heard it's more science fiction fantasy, but that's okay. I just want to experience it for myself, and again, it's another big chunky one, so I'm probably going to read it over the winter months if I can get a hold of a copy, and I'm just really looking forward to that one as well. So that is it for this video. Let me know down below if you enjoyed it and if you'd like me to do this tag again next year. Also, if there is a tag that you really want me to do, leave a comment down below with the title. I'll be honest, I don't do a lot of tags, and that's because I enjoy framing videos my own way and kind of putting my own spin on the different topics that get discussed on BookTube rather than relying on someone else's questions. Sometimes I find tags to be a little bit repetitive, but if there is a tag that you really want me to do, something that you want me to weigh in on, I would love to know. If you're new here, consider subscribing. If you like the video, please like it with a thumbs up, drop a comment, and hit that notification bell if you don't want to miss a video. Thank you all for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.